This is what video games used to look like. It's none other than Atari. And over the years, the consoles have gone through a big change. Back then, Atari was compared to the Sega, Nintendo, and PlayStation and Microsoft/Xbox. It was the pioneer of video game consoles. But back in the 1970s and the 80s, people were packed of this company. And my god, was it so good. Let's jump into it. It all started in 1971, where two people named Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney found this company. They were so inspired and had interests in video games, and they made a game together called Computer Space. And my god, was it, I think it was the first commercially arcade game to be introduced. It even had an arcade machine that Bushnell designed just for the futuristic style. Eventually, after they heard of this name, they changed their name to just Atari. Maganox made their Maganox Odyssey, which released, and this inspired Atari to make consoles like this and games like this. In 1972, Atari made this game called PONG, and my god, it's just simple. In 1975, they made their first home console for the PONG. They did a very well job, and it sold over many copies. No one knew at the time, but then, in 1977, they released their best one yet, the Atari 2600. The console came with 2 joysticks, a controller, and multiple games with it. You could play all classic games like Pitfall, Super Invaders, Frogger, which would be on multiple watches, and of course, Donkey Kong from the arcade. The Atari 2600 was a massive success and had 30 million copies sold, and that was the better year for the Atari consoles. In 1979, they released 8-bit computers for Atari. They had a couple of new games added for the console, which added more colors to it and more fun to play. It was a family computer trying to come up with either the Commodore 64 or whatever, trying to max Commodore and other stuff. And they did a very good job with both of them. In the end, they sold 4 million units sold, which I think is kind of a bit cool. In 1982, they released their worst thing yet, the Atari 5200. My god, does it look bad. The controller looks like a phone. But I have to say, in 1983, the video game crash happened, and Atari lost its prime. There was a downward spiral because of gaming industry, but Nintendo saved the gaming industry. In 1986, the Atari 7800 was released and was the first to feature backwards compatibility. It also had 2 different versions. This means you can now play older games, including almost all Atari 2600 games, including Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, and Pitfall, and also new games that were released for the console too, just to try to keep up the variety a bit. It also came with a game called Commando, a shooting game which at the time was very popular and was pretty fun, and in fact, it was actually pretty cool to play, but I've never played it before. Overall, it sold over 377 million units. In 1989, the Atari LYNX was released with Epix. This was Atari's first handheld console, which was, at the time, its first landmark. It had a lot of games released to the console, but only a couple games. It was also a very good success at the time. In 1993, they released another console, the Atari Jaguar, which it looks goofy to begin with. It only had 50 games, and there was also a CD-ROM, which nobody liked. In fact, 50 games for the actual console and 12 CD games. That sucks. Where did you learn to fly? It also sold a lot of units but eventually latest consoles I don't really want to talk about because they're all better, especially the one with the actual PlayStation controller. But bye.